Troutwine with Offshore Engineer TV, and we're very pleased to be joined today by Erik Milito, the president of the National Ocean Industries Association, better known as NOIA. So Erik, in a recent article for Offshore Engineer magazine, you highlighted some of the economic impact that the offshore energy industry delivers. Can you give us a brief recap of how the numbers look?
Yeah, I don't think people generally appreciate the extent of the supply chain that feeds into the offshore oil and gas industry in the Gulf of Mexico. It is long, it's strong, these are high-paying jobs. And we at NOIA want to make sure that we're telling the story because our industry has a great story to tell, and a lot of it's on the economic side. So the baseline is really 2019. We used EIAP, they are the Energy and Industrial Advisory Partners. But with 2019 being the baseline, we saw that there were 345,000 jobs supported. And of course, a lot of those are along the Gulf Coast, and that's to be expected. But what was surprising is that there are over 50,000 jobs outside of the Gulf Coast throughout the rest of the United States. So Gulf Coast, we're talking Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. So outside of those four states, there's 50,000 other jobs that are supported by the Gulf of Mexico and every state. So this study we did, if you go and look at it, our website, there's actually a list of 2,000 of those companies giving you a snapshot. There are buoy suppliers in Maine. There are concrete specialists in Hawaii, composite material providers and experts out of Oregon. It's because these are complex projects that require experts really throughout the country to be able to feed into it. Some other numbers that are interesting to be aware of relate to investment, $28 billion in 2019. GDP impact is about the same. This industry contributes about $28 billion of GDP impact for the country. Gulf of Mexico Energy Security Act was passed back in 2006. It provides funding to those coastal states. So Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama received in total $353 million of the revenues coming from offshore. So when companies are out there developing oil and gas in the offshore region, they pay bids up front for the right to secure those leases. Then they pay royalties when they're producing. And if they're not producing, they pay rentals. This is in the billions. I think since 2000, the industry has paid more than $120 billion to the federal treasury. So now we see some of that flowing to the Gulf Coast states. In 2019, those revenues were more than $5 billion to the federal government. And about $1 billion of that went to the Land and Water Conservation Fund. But most importantly, perhaps for a lot of our listeners, is that this is U.S. energy. It allows us to produce the energy here at home with a small environmental footprint so that we don't have to import it from other parts of the world.
So Erik, obviously the big news for the past 5 years for the industry has been the historically low prices of oil. More recently, obviously the U.S. elections. When I know a political changing of the guard always brings some uncertainty. As we roll into 2021, I guess, what are you working on, or what is the message to the Biden administration?
We see this as a tremendous opportunity for the offshore energy industry. And we know that the Biden administration has an intense focus on climate change. We at NOIA represent offshore oil and gas. We also represent offshore wind. And it surprises some, but we really don't see a conflict there. Our members support each other. And when you see how there are synergies between the two, you begin to understand that. Marine transportation, there's a lot of movement of personnel, of equipment, and those are the same types of companies. Some of our members who have been active in oil and gas in the Gulf of Mexico have played a role in the Atlantic in terms of marine transportation, marine service vessels, subsea completions. If you think about the technology and advancement of the offshore oil and gas industry, it's highly innovative, and much more work is now being done on the seafloor, on the seabed with these subsea completions. It reduces the environmental footprint because now you can feed a lot of production into one facility through the seafloor. And that's the type of technology that you see with offshore wind turbines, taking that power and taking that generation from the turbines, back to the coastline, so that those urban locations throughout the Atlantic have the benefit of that clean power. So first, we like to point out that, oil and gas companies or energy companies and the supply chain here for oil and gas is there to support offshore wind as well. We also like to talk about how this offshore Gulf of Mexico oil and gas industry has been the backbone of our country's energy production for decades. It's been producing more than 1 million barrels a day since '97, recently reached peak production at 2 million barrels a day. And this is about national security and energy security. And when you think about an energy transition that is going to be a part of the agenda from the Biden administration, energy is always in transition. We've seen it with coal to gas over the last several years. And it's based on many factors: supply, affordability, reliability, but increasingly it's going to be based on emissions. And as you go through a transition, if you're going to be targeting 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees for purposes of addressing climate change, it's important that we're looking to the best environmental sources of oil to produce it. So whether it's 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees, if we're going to try to get to that, it's going to be based on technology, innovation. It's going to take some time. And it could be that we're still, as a globe, consuming 60 to 70 million barrels a day. So what we're preaching and what we're talking about is the need to continue to supply that oil, which fuels our economy, from the offshore Gulf of Mexico. And the reason why is we're finding that it has the lowest carbon intensity in terms of emissions of just about any source. Wood Mackenzie recently came out with some data showing that there's low carbon intensity. There's been some other research that shows that the carbon intensity of the Gulf of Mexico is half that of some of these unconventional plays. So as long as we're, as a globe, as a country, utilizing oil and gas, which does lift society, gives us the ability to have everything around us, let's make sure we're getting it homegrown, where we have a small environmental footprint and where the emissions are really lower than anywhere else. So I think we have a great story, and that's what we're taking to the Biden administration in our conversations.
Again, I know the remit of NOIA is broad, looking at the traditional oil and gas sectors and also the up and coming offshore wind sectors. I know there's not always a lot of good news to tell, but when you look today, where do you see areas for opportunity and growth?
Well, offshore wind is in its infancy. We only have 7 turbines up and running in the Atlantic right now. We got 2 in the Block Island project offshore Rhode Island, and I'm sorry, 5 in the Block Island project offshore Rhode Island, and then we have 2 turbines in the first federal project off the coast of Virginia, and that's expected to be kind of the tip of the spear when it comes to what we're going to see. University of Delaware, beginning of 2019, put out a study showing that they expect there to be $68 billion of investment through 2030 in these projects throughout the Atlantic. That's based upon the commitments that the various states have made. You've got Connecticut, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, and Rhode Island, initially committing to about 15 gigawatts of power coming from offshore. That has risen. It's more like 25 gigawatts. A gigawatt generally could power 700,000 to 1 million homes. So it's huge what we're looking at here. You've seen many companies step up and begin submitting their construction and operation plans. It's basically now a situation where we're waiting for Vineyard Wind to get approved, and that should open the floodgates, and we'll then see a lot of these opportunities become reality. We also worked with Wood Mackenzie to do another study, along with some of our other trade associations in the wind space, to look at the impacts if you have additional lease sales. They haven't had a lease sale for federal offshore acreage for wind in a while, and that would generate a huge amount of investment opportunity as well. And we looked at New York, the Carolinas, Maine, as well as California, and you're looking at perhaps 80,000 jobs being supported per year, tens of billions of dollars of investment through 2035 and through 2040. So this is the area where, because it's in its infancy and because we've learned from the European experience, we expect to see a lot of investment, a lot of economic activity. Gulf of Mexico, still strong for oil and gas. We look at that as being really the second leading basin globally when it comes to discoveries and new projects coming online. I think it only trails Guyana, which has had major discoveries, but Gulf of Mexico is still a great region for energy development as well.
When you look specifically at offshore wind and the challenges and the hurdles that are ahead, what is NOIA doing to help your members jump those hurdles so that we can build a stronger, sustainable, and broad industry?
Yeah, we've been working with both Congress and the current administration, and we've been working with the transition team for the Biden administration just to highlight the need to make sure that we have predictability and certainty in the permitting and processing of these projects at the federal level. If we're able to see the light at the end of the tunnel for these projects, then the companies will be able to invest with much greater certainty, much greater predictability. And it's really been NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, whereby if the federal government doesn't put together a good record and do a good review, you can end up with legal challenges, and it ties things up. And that's what we've seen over the past couple of years is really supplementing of the environmental impact statements to make sure they're robust and strong. But there are a lot of projects outside of Vineyard Wind that are waiting, the notice of intent document, which would allow the government to move forward and begin the process of reviewing their plans and getting that going. And then there's also the leasing side, getting the lease auctions up and running. So we're pushing to make sure that Congress is appropriating the money so they have the resources to do this work, and pushing the administration to get the permitting process smooth and streamlined so that these companies can confidently move forward, make the investments, begin the planning, get the construction going, and get these projects up and running so the whole country can really benefit. If you're looking at the Atlantic, there's a lot of jobs that are going to be transitioned to the Atlantic, but at the same time, we've seen a lot of this work go to companies out of the Gulf, and there will be companies throughout the country providing their services and skills as well. We're also working with Congress to try to get some legislation passed on jobs and training to make sure we have the 21st century workforce in place for the offshore wind sector, and make that a reality. The Biden administration and the Trump administration as well, they have both made it a priority to make sure these are jobs coming for U.S. companies and for U.S. workers. And that's going to happen. And that's what we're going to be pushing through our membership, as we have companies throughout our membership and throughout this country that are ready to step into this. Let's get the red tape, the bureaucracy out of the way, and let's get these projects moving from a permitting standpoint.